We're going to talk about giving across generations. And so I think we likely all have our notions around, we're going to talk specifically around Gen Z today. And I think as a father of three Gen Z kids, this generation has a lot to offer. And I think we all have kind of maybe our preconceived notions about this generation. I'm excited to kind of put some data to some of our thoughts around this. So Saiba is going to share the giving report that they put together around Gen Z specifically. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to learn a little bit more from her around that generation and their giving habits and their giving preferences and various other things. We're going to take a look in DonorDock. How can we kind of leverage some of that information and make that useful? And we're going to answer your questions. So just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording this, and so we will make that available after the webinar. Feel free to ask questions as we're going. Our one request is that if you could use the Q&A feature within Zoom here, that'll allow us to kind of keep those things over in an area where we will be able to get to them and answer them. And feel free to ask questions as we're going through. But also know that we are going to have a dedicated Q&A time at the end as well. So we may hold some of the questions until then. Rob is also from the DonorDock team is joining us today. And so he's going to be helping monitor kind of the questions and various other things. So I think that's our housekeeping items that we have. So Saiba, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. For those of you who don't know me, as Matt said, my name is Saiba. I work over at GoFundMe Pro. I lead some of our partner marketing efforts over there, so get to work with really awesome partners across the nonprofit sector, specifically who are implementing, enhancing, developing, or integrating technology for the nonprofit sector. So it's always a pleasure, and I'm really, really excited to dig into the findings of the Gen Z report today.
Awesome. Well, why don't we go ahead and kick off here? And like I said, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll try and answer them as we're going and also have some time at the end. So excited to dig into this. Like I said, I have a almost 22-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old. So they all fit squarely into Gen Z. And again, love that generation. But I think there are some kind of ideas around that generation when it comes to philanthropic things and giving. So loving to dig into the data a little bit more and learn today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to just quickly introduce GoFundMe Pro for anyone who might be unfamiliar with us. A few years ago, GoFundMe and GoFundMe Pro, which was formerly Classy, for those of you familiar with that name, came together to really unite supporter fundraising tools with advanced nonprofit fundraising technology within one ecosystem. So GoFundMe Pro is really the culmination of that, of nonprofit fundraising tools with robust consumer insights and research from GoFundMe with access to the world's largest giving community. So we have over 200 million people that are a part of the combined GoFundMe Pro ecosystem. And a lot of that community is what helps us develop reports like the one you're going to see today to really get access to that community and understand their giving behaviors. So really excited to dig into it. I will just go ahead and skip the agenda slide since we went through what we're going to cover today and dig into the report. So as Matt was saying, there are some, notions we have about this generation, and you've likely heard the narrative that the general sentiment around Gen Z is that they show up online, they speak out, they care deeply, but the engagement doesn't necessarily translate into meaningful impact. And when it comes to giving, action doesn't always follow. That's what we've heard. It's a story that's repeated often enough to shape strategy. It influences how nonprofits prioritize audiences, where they invest, and who they actually expect to amplify causes. But what if that story isn't really complete? And what if the issue isn't that Gen Z isn't giving, but that we've been looking for generosity in the wrong places? Because when we looked at the data with Giving Tuesday, we found that the story really wasn't complete. So I want to get into a little bit of the report structure before digging into the findings. GoFundMe Pro and Giving Tuesday released this report on Gen Z to dig into the reality of how they engage. And these findings come from Giving Tuesday's Giving Pulse surveys, which is a weekly tracking study run by the Giving Tuesday Data Commons. And each week, roughly 100 US adults are surveyed from an Ipsos panel with quotas aligned to census benchmarks. For this analysis, we're comparing respondents aged 18 to 29, which we're calling Gen Z, with everyone aged 30 to 85. So that's about 2,000 Gen Z respondents and 8,400 older adults surveyed over the course of 2025. And by combining the behavioral data from Tuesday and platform insights from GoFundMe, we were able to develop this report that explores how Gen Z express generosity today and how nonprofits like you all can capture and sustain that participation. So the first one I want to get into here is this one. Our biggest finding was simple. Gen Z gives in more ways and more often than other adults. Over 70% of Gen Z participated in some form of giving in the previous week. What's particularly striking is that they're doing this often while being students early in their careers or facing greater financial constraints than older adults. In fact, this stat is 5 percentage points higher than the other adults, so that 30 to 85 range I mentioned earlier. And when money is tight, they're still showing up across every category measured in Giving Pulse, including monetary donations, volunteering, advocacy, and fundraising. So generosity for Gen Z isn't limited to financial capacity. The next one is that Gen Z generosity is learned, reinforced, and activated through relationships. 57% said that family or peers shape their giving decisions versus approximately 45% of other adults. And what that tells us is that trust is increasingly transferred socially. It's flowing through friends, family, colleagues, and immediate networks. And Gen Z is giving, often it flows towards stories, people, and causes that feel tangible and close to them. And this one is a really powerful one as well. As giving has become more social, it also becomes more participatory. So each act of generosity increases the likelihood of another. So that really creates this nice network effect that can scale quickly across communities. Giving Tuesday survey found that Gen Z is 8 percentage points more likely than other adults to recommend, encourage, endorse, advocate for, or publicly share the activities of a community group, registered nonprofit, or independent efforts to help others. And this finding tells us that Gen Z doesn't see sharing as separate from giving, and that they're 10 times more likely than boomers to share their donations online. And nearly half believe that people should share donations to inspire others to get involved. So, by mobilizing their communities, Gen Z really acts as this powerful amplifier and catalyst to bring more donors into the fold. And this is really where supporter led community fundraising platforms like GoFundMe can help play a role. And the last one I'll share here is that there's often a concern that, and I'll preface this one actually. There's a concern that some community fundraising tools like GoFundMe could divert support away from nonprofits. And I want to answer that head on. And what we found was actually the opposite. So nearly 91% of Gen Z using community powered fundraising platforms gave to registered nonprofits, which is 16 percentage points higher than peers who don't use those platforms. And so that's telling us that helping a person, supporting a community effort, and supporting a nonprofit are not separate behaviors. They're part of one connected generosity ecosystem. And community fundraising is not at all competing with nonprofit giving, but is often an entry point into it. So when we put all these findings together, a pattern emerges. Giving is social, trust comes through people, and participation often becomes or it comes before a donation, which means participation itself is a signal. So someone sharing your campaign is a signal. Someone fundraising on your behalf is a signal. Someone advocating for you is a signal. So these are not secondary behaviors, but they're indicators of future engagement. And if Gen Z is engaging through community sharing and fundraising, your CRM, DonorDock, should help you recognize those behaviors and build meaningful follow-up journeys. So for this next part, I'm going to hand over to Matt to actually show you what it looks like to put this data into practice and understand some of how you can leverage your CRM to really tap into the Gen Z generation.
Thanks, Saiba. So yeah, I'll definitely share, but definitely some really interesting stats that you shared there. And I think in some ways kind of eye-opening for me. I think oftentimes I think we maybe think that, like you said, Gen Z maybe isn't giving at the same level or isn't as engaged in giving. And maybe this kind of maybe puts into perspective that they just may be looking at it differently or engaging differently than some of the other generations. So we'll jump over into DonorDock and share a few things here. But one of the things that I want to I'm going to request Rob that for sharing access here. There we go. One of the things that I think is important to touch on here is we're talking about Gen Z today, but at the heart of a lot of this within your CRM is the idea and the importance of like proper segmentation. So much of this starts with proper segmentation. And really what I mean by that is having these different vectors that we segment our contacts in our CRM on. Generation is one of those vectors that I think can be extremely powerful. And when we think about how best to use the data that we have within our CRM, so much of it to me comes down to having proper segments and then using that information to engage appropriately with each of those segments. And so I'll kind of spell that out a bit more. Let's think about Gen Z, for example. I think we know that Gen Z likely is more apt to engage with you through things like their devices. So, they may respond or engage with a text message, for example, maybe more than they would if you pick up the phone and try and make a phone call to them. Now, that's a generalization, but I think it's one that would likely hold true in a lot of instances. Whereas other generations maybe are more inclined to engage with you through a different channel. Maybe they are more likely to pick up the phone, or they want that personalized phone call, or they want to get something in the mail. And so I think the important thing when we're thinking about how do we do this inside CRM is that, like, step one is let's build out those segments. And so, just as a simple example, let's say that we run a fundraiser through GoFundMe Pro and we are actively targeting that Gen Z audience. So we're showing up, we are pushing that fundraising campaign through channels that we expect to to attract the Gen Z audience. Within our CRM, then we want to make sure that we are segmenting those donors as they come in, and doing that in the appropriate way. And so one way that we can do that is that we can leverage, like we're going to show our automations tool in DonorDock, where we can say, let's create an automation to do some auto segmenting by generation. And so this is a really simple concept that just to try and illustrate what we're talking about here. So what I've done is I've created an automation that when a gift gets created, I want to do some filtering on that gift, and say, in this instance, that if the campaign that it comes through, let's say through our GoFundMe Pro integration, is that Gen Z campaign where we were targeting a Gen Z audience through the right channels, that is the scenario that in this environment or in this example that we want to segment. So what's nice is that we could have multiple different campaigns that we're running targeting different generations in different ways. And this single automation could do that auto segmentation for us. So I've created this just as an example here. We could do it differently where we are targeting different generations based on the campaign. But in this case, if it is coming through the Gen Z campaign, I simply want to add a Gen Z badge to those particular donors who give through that campaign. And so I'm choosing the add badge step, and I'm going to do a badge called Gen Z donor. So our badging tool is our segmenting tool. You can start to extrapolate on this, that if we did have other campaigns going on targeting different generations, we could use the same automation to say, if it came through our baby boomers campaign that we're running, I want to tag them and badge them appropriately. And our goal here is to create these unique segments of donors that give us one more piece of information that may be very, very helpful when it comes time for us to engage with these donors as we're going forward. The way we would engage with Gen Z likely differs, as I said, between how we would engage with maybe other generations. And I think that's like one of the key points that we want to make here is like, and we've said this on other webinars, but the idea that we would engage with everybody the same way at the same time across the same channels is really not that effective. If I have a donor who wants to give through an online portal, and I send them a mailer in the mail with a thing to mail me a check in, that may not be that effective. Whereas on the flip side, if I have someone who's averse to giving through online channels and I send them an email with a link to give through our online giving platform, that may not be as effective. And so by creating these segments and truly understanding these segments, we can start to tailor the outreach across the channels and at the timing that makes sense, and inviting them to engage with us through ways that make sense for, in this case, a generational segment. Something that you touched on, Saiba, that I think gets kind of to circle back is 71% have given in some form in the last week. But that doesn't, to your point, that doesn't mean that they've necessarily all given financial gifts, right? There's lots of ways that they can contribute to an organization. And in some ways, I think just simple things like sharing a social post, like that is a way that they're contributing. Volunteering, you mentioned that, and I think that's another one. And so providing, when we're engaging with this generation, providing multiple ways for them to engage that aren't all financial ways that they can contribute is another really important thing, and may be a generational thing. So just overall concept is, the first step is to understand this, to get this information tracked. What are these different vectors of information and segments that we have, generation being one of them. Other ways that we've seen be successful. So like, you're not going to always know exactly, we do have a way to track a birth date in DonorDock. And if you can get that information, it's awesome information, and it can be used to help with segmentation around generation, along with follow-ups on birthdays and things like that. But it's sometimes difficult to get that information. What might be easier is to ascertain kind of what generational bucket that they fit into. And that may come in multiple ways. It may come, like we said, through how they've chosen to engage or give. It may come from like contact enrichment tools. So you think about something like a donor search or a windfall, something where it can take core contact information and enrich that information with additional information, like, their generation or their birth date, which you can use to derive. And sometimes it's just like, when you meet them, you can kind of figure it out, like what generation do they fit in, or what do you think they fit in? So multiple ways to get that data in. Once it's in, though, it's extremely useful. So we've got this automation that creates this badge. Now, as we go downstream of that, and we think about things like our outreach tools, so we have our email outreach tool, and that can be targeted to these different segments. And so rather than send everybody the same email, maybe we send out 2 or 3 emails that are driven by this segmentation that invites them into things within the organization that fit based on that generation. So we can use these segments in our like ongoing outreach with organization or with our donors. Same with our texting outreach. So texting might be a really good tool to use with that Gen Z crowd in comparison even to maybe email. And so if we can use the segmentation to say, we're going to email these 2 segments that we think respond better to email, and we're going to text this Gen Z segment because we've seen that they engage more with texting than they do with through email. And so it's like taking this stuff downstream and actually using it to help guide us and inform us on how we want to try and have stewardship and engagement with these donors. And then I think another example would be like our journeys, for example. So we have 6 core journeys for various life cycle stages. We build those and we send them to you out of the box, but they are completely customizable. And so like a really interesting way to customize this might be that in our first donor journey, we have some different branches based on the segment or based on the generation. So if the mobile number's filled and they've opted into SMS, maybe for Gen Z, rather than sending them some long email, some welcome email, it's a simple text that we send out in place of the email or in addition to the email. And so we're able to kind of use these tools and use these segments to create these different branches in our stewardship model that fit based on whatever that criteria is. Again, today we're talking about the generational vector, but I think you can apply this to a lot of different segments and segmenters in the concept of what we're thinking about. And so I think to kind of sum it up in my mind, it's like same channel, same timing, same message to everyone equals not very effective. Taking these data points that we know and understand and tailoring our outreach, our engagement, and our stewardship models across these different segments in a way that resonates with them, that's where we start to really see the unlock. And that's where the power of the data that we're pulling in from platforms like GoFundMe Pro or other integrations that we have, like maybe you have some kind of social listening type integration and you're syncing that data in and you're able to see like, here's an activity that they shared a post, for example. Or maybe it's through things like how they're engaging with our content, our email content, or different things like that. All of that becomes data that we can use to create these dynamic segments that allow us to then engage properly and steward properly based on what we know and what we can ascertain from our donors and the audience there. So very high level, we don't have a ton of time today, but wanted to just kind of touch on, we're getting this data. We have this repository of data coming in from different things in different places. And how can we leverage that to really make it make sense and be as effective as we can possibly be as we're engaging with donors? So a little bit of a demo there. Saiba, I'm going to hand it back to you to kind of continue on through the rest of the content. So I'm going to stop sharing now and let you take over.
Yeah, that was really, really helpful, even for myself to see, Matt. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's so helpful and useful to be able to actually like understand the findings that we're talking about today and then putting practical use around them. So I think what you just shared was just a really, really helpful way to understand, okay, I know this information about Gen Z. What are the steps now that I can take on my own personally in my day to day to get this generation more engaged in my cause and with my nonprofit. So
And I think that's kind of the trick, right? It's like we hear all these strategies and all this data, and I think we can get overwhelmed, with that. And it's like, how can we try and, like you said, use that in a practical way to improve what we're doing from an organizational perspective? Like that's the connect, and that's the unlock that we're trying to have, I think, around some of this. So
Yep, 100%. And I think like in addition to the CRM, we're going to talk about a few other things you can start doing that then should funnel down into your CRM to draw some of these insights and take the engagement around Gen Z to the next level. So, one thing I want to share with you is this concept of a participation ladder. So, earlier we were talking about how Gen Z is 10 times more likely than boomers to actually share a cause. And Gen Z often begins their relationship with the cause through sharing or fundraising or advocacy before becoming that more traditional donor. And if you were able to read the report, one concept we talked about a lot is this one, the participation ladder. And what we've seen is historically nonprofits have optimized around the donation page, but Gen Z is often entering through an active expression or community before they ever donate. They see, they share, they fundraise, they donate, and then those behaviors continue to repeat. So the opportunity here is designing experiences that make movement between those stages really easy. And designing a participation ladder, not just a donation page, will be really critical. So the winning flow that we usually see is see, share, fundraise, donate, repeat. So Gen Z, again, often entering through expression and community is really what you want to hone in on. And the main takeaway is that the donation isn't the beginning of the journey with Gen Z. It's just one step in their journey. So recognizing that and being able to strategize around that is going to be really important. So once you build your participation ladder, the next step is to expand your reach. Okay, I have this ladder, I have this flow in my mind. Now, how do I actually reach the supporters that I'm trying to reach? And when donations are coming from fewer people nowadays, we need to really reverse that trend by doing just that, reaching people outside of our networks and building communities of supporters. So a recent example I want to share with you is Stand Up to Cancer. They partnered with GoFundMe Pro on an experiment where supporters who donated to a cancer-related GoFundMe fundraiser were prompted to make an optional $5 donation to Stand Up to Cancer at checkout. It was a very low lift test with a goal, capturing incremental revenue from supporters on GoFundMe who are already motivated to give and create new donor relationships at a time when we know that small dollar giving is down. This checkout experiment led to really impressive initial results for Stand Up to Cancer, a 52% increase in donations per day on average. So, really cool and powerful example of how activating communities that are already connected to a cause or mission that haven't previously engaged with your nonprofit. The next one here is turning inspiration into continuous support. So again, Gen Z isn't waiting for your campaign necessarily. They don't start with your brand. They start with a person, a story, or a moment. And the question is whether you've built an easy path for them that helps turn that moment of inspiration into ongoing support. So recurring giving, simple asks, low friction engagement become really important. And if you don't have a substantial portion of your revenue coming from recurring donors, that math will eventually catch up. And another example I want to share here is an example from Tunnel to Towers. They found a way to do this in support of their mission to honor the military and first responders. And they're leaning into mission-driven storytelling through media appearances, web, direct mail, email, digital, social, the full spectrum. And they found that keeping the ask consistent with a low barrier $11 a month contribution in honor of 9/11 would keep donors coming back. And as a result, they now add thousands of new recurring donors a month on average. And a majority of their online donations come from those recurring gifts. And of course, turning that single act of generosity into something longer term becomes much easier with a CRM in place like DonorDock, where they can actually help bridge the gap. So if someone donates, shares a campaign, participates. Those are all signals that can trigger a really thoughtful follow-up journey. And recurring giving really doesn't happen by accident. It's because of the consistent engagement you're having with these donors over time. Matt, I don't know if you want to add anything to that on the DonorDock side and the recurring piece, but please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, I just agree wholeheartedly. Like the journey starts there, and then based on how you're engaging and you know, I think it's not a direct jump from like that one-time gift to becoming a recurring donor. It takes intentionality around stewardship. It takes relationship building, and if that is our goal, then yeah, leveraging those signals from tools like GoFundMe Pro, and then using those, like we said, appropriately with your stewardship model. I feel like that is the path to get from that one-time gift to that recurring. So I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I think yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. And then the last thing I want to share here with you all is really about how to turn those one-time givers into champions. So giving for Gen Z especially is rooted in trusted personal relationships. We talked earlier about how nearly 60% of Gen Z says that family and peers are shaping their giving decisions. And we also know from the research that community fundraising can be a powerful on-ramp to nonprofit support. And when you put that together, it suggests that one of your best acquisition channels might already be sitting in your database. Not because those supporters are necessarily your largest donors, but because they're your most credible advocates. So when supporters fundraise on your behalf, they're combining your story with their own story and they're lending their voice, their relationships, and their networks to your mission. And in many cases, they're introducing your organization to entirely new audiences for the very first time. And that's why it is so important to think beyond one-time gifts and start identifying potential champions, people who can share, advocate, fundraise, and ultimately help bring others into your mission. And Matt, I think this is another area where CRM is just so incredibly valuable. And I think, by tracking participation alongside donations, nonprofits can really start identifying the supporters who are most likely to become the next fundraisers, ambassadors, and champions.
Yeah, I think so too. And as we kind of roll into this, where like it or not, like AI is certainly something that's on the minds of a lot of us, today, and like that predictive modeling type of idea. Like if we can get that data in, and then use that data to help us, to your point, like who should we be engaging with that may be kind of that next generation of champions that creates that trust across that segment of donors. Certainly a lot of opportunity there, I think, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gen Z is going to be really strong here in
Yeah.
terms of the folks that are going to become the champions because we already know that they believe in sharing and that sharing and giving are really intertwined in across their giving behaviors. So
Yep.
a really, really cool and interesting way that you can engage with Gen Z is to just ask them to share and advocate for your cause.
Yeah, for
And
sure. And just to kind of go back, I love the concept of the ladder that you had kind of shared there a few minutes ago.
yeah, I can
And
go back to that.
yeah, I just kind of curious your thoughts around, like, so, if that first step is like seeing it and then sharing it, how do nonprofits, some of that can be hard, though some of those signals can be difficult to pick up on. And so how can nonprofits like take that information and make sure that there's not a drop off in from the share step to that next step? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so are you asking from sharing to like
Yeah.
fundraising
Yeah.
out?
How do you bridge that gap, like practically? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like once the sharing step has happened, I think, one thing we're really learning here about Gen Z is that it's all about community. So I think like the more you can also amplify what they're sharing
Mm,
and, show appreciation for that. I think is going to be so important for Gen Z because they've already given you a clear signal that they want to be or that they're somehow connected to your cause. And so bringing them more and more in, and welcoming them in is so important. I think so much of the follow-up journeys and the appreciation we show currently is rooted in monetary donations. Like the
Yeah.
thank you is always about, hey, thank you for donating to my nonprofit or thank you for
Yeah.
donating to my cause. But we see that less when it's just, a share or something of that nature. So I
Yeah.
think being able to bridge that gap is such a powerful way to get them to that next step.
I love that. And I think it, even from a directional aspect for DonorDock, like it makes me think, because to your point, we have our 6 pre-built journeys. They're very focused around stewardship that is happening, 5 out of the 6 are post-gift type of journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe there's some opportunity for us to kind of continue to build out additional things that are maybe journeys around non-financial gifts, whether that be a share, whether that be a volunteer time, that they've given. So I love that idea and I love that concept, and I think that's a really, really good distinction and thing for you to kind of call out there, that we need to maybe be broadening what we're thinking of as things that we need to thank our constituents for. And in this generation, that may be as simple as, they shared something that's helping the organization. So thank you for kind of digging into that a bit more.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think another one that I would say is like amplifying stories of real people. Because I think in this report we found is that the institutional messaging isn't as resonant with this generation as like just one-to-one stories of someone who's actually benefited from the nonprofit, or if a particular member of Gen Z has somehow benefited from the resources a nonprofit has shared with them or provided to them, allowing them to tell the story from their point of view, is really powerful. And I know sometimes that can be hard when nonprofits have worked so hard to establish a voice and a brand that people recognize. But I think a little bit of being able to let the donors really tell it from their perspective is another really powerful way to just keep them engaged and amplifying the way that they're telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. And I think, you know, the takeaway hopefully isn't like, oh, this is just more that you need to go do. But like, there are differences. The reality is there are differences in how these different generations think about philanthropy and think about supporting causes. And so, as this generation, we're talking about like the 18 to, was it 18 to 30? Is that the, or
18 to 29, yeah.
18 to 29? But really this generation is from like 1997 all the way up to like 2013. It's a very, there's a lot, but we're talking about the adult ages within Gen Z. But again, there's more Gen Z that are going to be in the kind of giving capacity level over the coming years as well. And so, um, you know, I think just thinking about that and how in our approach and trying to make sure that we're building a resilient donor base that isn't aging out, and that there's new donors coming in that from these other generations, I think is just a long-term, stability type of concept that is important. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I think one thing we'll leave you with here is that, as you think about putting these strategies into action, I think, the most important question to ask is who in your communities can be your next evangelist, your next message carrier, and your next great fundraiser. And think about that broadly, not just in terms of the big dollar donor or board member. But think about those who are signaling belief in your cause. And it could be the person that's always posting on Facebook when they donate. It could be the person that is with your organization sticker or swag, that's, proudly affixed to their laptop or water bottle, or, a hat that they're wearing. It could be the regular volunteer who wants to do more to help. And it could be someone your organization has helped, like I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, the other question is like, how do you use your technology that you have today to identify and nurture these folks, and encourage them to be engaged in this full ecosystem of giving, that's not just, transactional. Um, so the takeaways, I want to leave you with is that, Gen Z is not a future donor segment. They are active today. So build for how they're already engaging, which is, socially, publicly, and relationally across multiple formats. And then we've talked about participation being a leading indicator. So build for that, and design a participation ladder, because participation is a leading indicator of how they are going to continue engaging with your cause over time. And just to repeat that flow, we're looking at seeing, sharing, fundraising, donating, and then repeat. And then trust, of course, we've talked about this so much, but trust is built through people. So turn those supporters into distributors. Make giving easy to share and personalize. And for Gen Z specifically, amplification is foundational to how they engage. It's not a bonus. And then community fundraising, that's an on-ramp. So embrace that as an acquisition engine, and know that the strongest nonprofits will enable supporters to move seamlessly between peer giving and giving to your organization. And I think to close us out, this is what we have to share. Gen Z isn't disengaged; they're just engaging differently than maybe what we're typically used to. So I think we have a poll that we wanted to launch here, and we'd really like to hear from you based on today. What's one thing you'll leave here ready to do next? Give folks a minute to answer.
I'm going to answer that I want to improve how we identify and track supporter engagement signals. And I'm thinking about that, from a DonorDock perspective, like how can we continue to improve what we're doing for our customers to capture some of these other non-giving signals as effectively as possible. And like really stuck with me, Saiba, is kind of what you said around like we tend to do thank yous and engagement and stewardship based on financial transactions. And I think you're right on there. And it's just kind of it's made me open up my mind a little bit here to like there's probably downstream things of that, or upstream things of that, I should say, with Gen Z that we maybe want to be thinking about, and that we want to think differently about, where this journey starts maybe a little earlier than we've had previously. So thank you for sharing that. I think that was really a good insight there.
Yeah, of course.
Well, let's jump to some questions here. So if you do have questions for us, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I've got a couple that we can kind of kick us off with here. And then as people have others, they can certainly add them. So let me just bring up my little list of questions here. If I can find my cursor.
I see one for you, Matt. I
Yeah.
can I can read it to you.
Yeah,
For
perfect.
organizations that aren't currently tracking things like shares, referrals, fundraising activity, what's the first thing you'd recommend they start capturing in CRM?
Yeah, great question. So I think the most practical thing, without needing a lot of technology and things like that, are what are the interactions that you are having with people? So, whether that's, I think things like volunteering come to mind, the actual interactions that your team is having with these potential donors. And then I think the next level is like we get into like the social listening type concept of like there's ways to do social listening using technology. There's also just old-fashioned ways of doing social listening by monitoring what's going on in your social channels that you have and who is sharing things, and go in and be able to track that information, in your CRM, even if you don't have it like as an automated or integrated type of thing. I think those can be really powerful signals. And then there's signals that are coming from um, there's signals that are coming from like fundraising platforms, like we've talked about. And so all of those things I think can be really good. But I think where it starts is like, what are the interactions that you're actually having as an organization with people? And if you're not keeping track of that today, I think that can be a really good place to start.
Yeah, I love that. I have another one here that says, how do we reach Gen Z donors when we don't have a big social media presence or budget? I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
And you don't need a big following. What you need are the right people sharing on your behalf. So nearly 60% again of Gen Z say family and peers shape their giving decisions, which means your existing supporters are really your best distribution channel. It doesn't have to be too many of them, but a lot of those folks are going to be willing to share and advocate on your behalf. So it's really about focusing on equipping those folks that are already in your community to tell your story in their own words and in their own networks. That's really free reach that you already have access to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I agree. And I think, um, also like, don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and be on every single social channel or social, network. Like, maybe pick a couple and try and go deep into those. Not trying to do everything on every channel, I think, is another just like simple piece of advice that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Somebody posted in the chat, I'm confused. Is it recommended to utilize GoFundMe and DonorDock? Please differentiate the services. That's a good question. So, at DonorDock, we are primarily a CRM first company. So our platform is really designed to help you engage with donors, steward donors well, market to donors. And then GoFundMe, and GoFundMe Pro specifically, is a very capable front end fundraising platform. So, event fundraising, peer to peer fundraising, online fundraising. And we just happen to have a great integration between the two. So, for customers who are using GoFundMe Pro and using DonorDock, we can pull that data in seamlessly and get access to all of that in DonorDock to do things like what we're talking about today, which is continuing on with donor stewardship after those transactions are happening, whether that's in GoFundMe Pro or in some other fundraising platform. So they're very complementary services, and customers can use both. They might use one without the other, and that happens as well. But they do complement each other really well. So, and I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that, Saiba.
Yeah. I think you really nailed it. I think the only thing I'd add there is like when we're talking about those different strategies as it relates to Gen Z specifically, we talked about, creating those seamless experiences like for sharing and things like that. And to Matt's point, that's really where GoFundMe Pro and GoFundMe shine in
Yeah.
terms of making that easy for donors and supporters. And then, of course, there is like the other element of like, okay, where is that data going? And how do I make use of it long term? So that's where, our partnership with DonorDock is really, really strong.
Yeah. One question I think that comes to mind for me, Saiba, I'm curious your thoughts. So the data shows that Gen Z is in giving more often maybe than other generations.
Yeah.
Are they giving as much? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is this they're giving more often, $5 donations? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, to be really straight, they're not really going to give necessarily as much in dollar amounts yet.
Mhm.
Many are students or early in their careers. But I think that talking about the amount of donation is maybe where we get tripped up
Mhm.
and might not be the right framing. I think the more important thing to focus on is really about the participation rate and network reach. And a Gen Z supporter who's starting a fundraiser and mobilizing their network can drive actually more dollars to your cause than a single large gift might. And that 10 times sharing multiplier and the $100 average driven per organizer share are the numbers to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. So I think with that, we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up. Saiba does have some links to download these reports. So if you're interested in this data and want to dig into this more yourself, grab those QR codes to get those downloaded. As Rob said in the chat, we will be sending a follow-up email and a recap email after the session, and that will have a link to the recording. So if you weren't able to join us for the whole thing, you will be able to, review that recording, and we'll get that sent out. Saiba, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this information. I think, again, I walk out of here with my mind is kind of churning on some things here of like, how can we help our customers more in properly engaging and building out their fundraising model and their stewardship model for this generation. And so I appreciate the thoughtful information that you shared, and I'm excited to kind of take some of these thoughts and go noodle on them a bit more. So thank you for
Yeah, of
joining us.
course. Thank you so much. I think, being able to put this all into a practical application is again so helpful for the nonprofits that we're serving together. So it was a pleasure to be on, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us as well. I know it's a lot to take your time out of your day to be able to join webinars like this. So we appreciate you. We appreciate all of the work that you do on a daily basis in moving your mission forward. And if there's anything that we can do to help you in that front, whether it's GoFundMe, GoFundMe Pro, DonorDock, let us know. Like, we're here to help, and we want to be able to be supportive of you. So thank you all for joining us, Saiba. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.